Hello everyone, my name is Beth Worrell and I want to welcome you today to the next in our RAIN webinar series. Today we are talking about diversity and inclusion for all, and we are joined by some fantastic guests. We're grateful that you would make the time to attend today and we hope you enjoy the presentation. First of all, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land upon which we meet today. I would also like to pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. Today, I am joining you from Ghana lands down here in South Australia, and we would love to hear where you are joining from all around the country. I am joined today by some fantastic colleagues. As you can see from the screen, they are exceptionally accomplished across this topic of diversity and inclusion in AI. There is lots of information about both of these people on our invitation, and they also have LinkedIn and some information about them on the CSIRO website. So in the interest of time, I won't provide a thorough introduction, but suffice to say you have two of Australia's leading experts on this topic of diversity and inclusion in artificial intelligence. We're very grateful, Didar and Muneera, that you would spend time with us today to talk about your insights. And I know that you're very generous with your expertise and insights with people who are looking at this topic in their organisations, and I know that they will receive a lot of valuable insights from you today. Before we get into the content, I just want to talk briefly about the National AI Centre. We were established several years ago with some funding from the Department of Industry, Science and Resources, and we exist to accelerate the positive AI adoption and innovation with the ambition to benefit Australia's business and whole of community. We're very grateful for foundation partners Google and Cedar, and we have and work with lots of other organisations here in Australia as well. We primarily do two things. We are all about creating resources and tools and materials that help Australian businesses better adopt artificial intelligence. And we're also about growing a responsible AI industry here in Australia. And I think we can all be proud of a lot of the AI innovation that we are starting to see develop out of our Australian startups and scale-ups. I want to quickly talk to you about the Responsible AI Network. So we are growing this network in Australia at the moment and working with some fantastic leading organisations in Australia, including the AIIA, the Ethics Centre, Governance Institute, Standards Australia, AI Group, Human Technology Institute at UTS, Gradient Institute and the Tech Council. And we create resources, events, materials, guides, templates and more under 7 actionable pillars that you can see on the screen today. We are always interested in learning more about the research that you yourself might be working on, or materials and programs that you are investing in your organisations. So please do get in touch with us if you'd like some more information about how to be part of the Responsible AI Network. We will also have some further information at the end of this webinar that you can access to be part of this network going forward. So with that, I want to hand over to Muneera and Didar. We hope you enjoy the webinar, and I will see you shortly.
Hello, everyone. Beth, can you confirm that my slides are visible?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Thank you so much. I welcome you all to today's webinar, where me and Didar, we will be presenting the work that we have been doing in our AI diversity and inclusion team. So just going quickly through the agenda, where we will be answering some of the questions we have put around to understand the concepts and present the work that we are doing, starting with why do we need the diversity inclusion in AI to begin with? What exactly is diversity inclusion in AI? How to ensure the D&I in AI? When to apply D&I principles in AI? Who should be the person responsible for all the work? what is not diversity inclusion in AI. That's an important point towards the end, and why it is more important in the age of generative AI. So we will be trying to answer all these questions while we will be presenting our concepts and work that we have been producing in our research team. Starting with the why do we need the diversity inclusion in AI? This is an important one to make people understand need for these principles. So in the last 5 to 10 years, how many cases we keep hearing about the discrimination that comes along with some of the incidents that happening because of the AI system, starting with this story of an African American person who was wrongfully accused of theft, even though he has never been in that area where the theft was reported. Similarly, we have Amazon's AI recruitment tool that was given the task to learn from the historical data of the resumes and then put forward the potentially best candidates for the job. And over the time, it learned from the historical records that men were more suitable for jobs. And eventually, Amazon had to take down the tool because the biases were too strong in there. Then another case of the racial bias in the medical algorithms that favored the white patients over the more deserving Black patients. Moving forward, we have the data that is used for that many AI technologies that use for the motion capture are all historically driven from the healthy male subjects, able bodies. So this one size fits all approach that will kind of fail the diversity for those people who have different body types or those who conform to the disability requirements. Then another case we have heard in 2019, it was about the Apple Card credit assessment, where some of the people, they pointed out that the offer for the credit limit for men was very, very different than the women, even though it was contested later, but many female users, they did report that this incident happened. And now moving forward into the future about the ChatGPT, there's a recent study that has already shown that when used two language models, one ChatGPT and Alpaca, that they ask these LLMs to produce recommendation letter for hypothetical employees. And their research analyzed that they used very different language when they described imaginary male and female co-workers. And in their prompt and then the generated output, the language they have highlighted can be seen that how it differs. It replicates the gender biases in those recommendation letters by learning from the past records. So all these incidents, why are all of them happening? And we can very clearly, it's very intuitively see that the diversity inclusion principles have been ignored potentially in the design, development, deployment stages of the AI systems. And that is why we need the diversity inclusion in AI to ensure that these incidents do not happen in future, or at least they reduce the harmful impacts of happening in the future. So I hand over here to Didar to define the vision for the diversity inclusion here in Data 61, how we started it and how we're moving forward. Didar?
Thank you, Muneera, and it's a great pleasure to be here today. Thank National AI Center and Beth for inviting us. And in the next section of this presentation, I'm going to basically describe where we started over 2 years ago in CSIRO's Data 61 to investigate and look at diversity and inclusion in AI. So we started out by looking at building foundations and resources. When we started, we looked around to see whether we can find a satisfactory definition for what diversity and inclusion in AI means, and whether there are any help out there that people can use, whether there is enough evidence. And so the first part of our work was mainly building foundations and resources. And also the second part, once we have done that, and I will go through this in the next few slides in relation to the definitions and the guidelines and the evidence-based research that we've done, and how we are continuously looking at operationalizing diversity and inclusion in AI. We have also spent quite a lot of time engaging with industry and partnering with them, doing case studies to build evidence, but also not just to build evidence, but also to help the professionals in their work, as well as receiving feedback on the resources that we are producing. And the final point is related to our work and efforts in literacy, advocacy, and awareness. We started out by basically giving lots and lots of presentations, seminars, panel talks, public speaking to advocate for diversity and inclusion in artificial intelligence. We established the inaugural symposium on diversity and inclusion in AI last year with quite a lot of people, both from research and industry, attending. And from that symposium, we organized a special collection of papers that will be published in the AI and Ethics Journal of Springer. And we have also been involved quite a lot in education and community service, providing lesson curriculums, etc., that's to become part of the overall responsible AI or ethical AI work that Data 61 is doing at the moment. So now going to the first part, which is building the foundation and resources. Next slide. So what is diversity and inclusion in AI? When I asked this question for myself, the only definition that I kind of found that resonated with me was the one that was given by Meg Mitchell from Hugging Face. She said in one of her talks that inclusion in AI means nobody should be excluded. And I felt that this was okay, but it wasn't really telling us exactly what diversity and inclusion means, because these two concepts are very closely intertwined. And so the definition that we came up with, and I will go through it step by step in the next few slides, is that this refers to the inclusion of humans with diverse attributes and perspectives in the data, process, system, and governance of the AI ecosystem. So this introduced basically 5 pillars. And I will tell you about those 5 pillars in a moment, but just to recap, I know that a lot of people have intuitive understanding of what diversity means in workplace and in society, referring to the representation of the diverse and different attributes of humans in groups and society. And of course, these attributes are known facets of diversity, and they're including but not limited to those that are mentioned as protected attributes in the Article 26 of ICCPR, and plus many others that have been added in Australia because ICCPR is not very new and it doesn't have all the different attributes. And finally, inclusion is the process of proactively involving and representing the most relevant humans with diverse attributes. And these are people who are impacted by and also have an impact on the AI ecosystem context. Now, I need to tell you, next slide, to tell you a little bit about what do we mean by AI ecosystem, because often we hear in business people to refer to AI ecosystem as basically AI industry, people who develop AI and sell AI. But this is not what we mean by AI ecosystem in our definition. Here we refer to the collection of 5 pillars: humans, data, process, system, and governance, plus the environment. This is the business domain, application domain within which the AI system is built and deployed and used. And the other thing that is important about AI ecosystem is that we advocate that diversity and inclusion principles and practices have to be pivotal to this AI ecosystem. This is the 5 pillars as well as the application domain, and they have to be embedded in all of these pillars in a specific context of use. Next slide. Now, I'm just briefly going through each of these 5 pillars, although they are fairly self-explanatory, but just to emphasize that humans are the core pillar of AI ecosystem. That's why in our diagram, we show that humans sit across everything. And the human-centeredness has been around for quite some time, and especially in AI, at least for the past decade. And it's not only achieved through meaningful inclusion of these relevant humans with diverse attributes, but it is also through their active participation and contribution in all the decision-making and governance processes in the AI lifecycle. And so there are two broad groups that we identify: those who use and benefit from AI systems, and those who design, develop, and deploy them. The next is about data. And of course, I find that whenever you talk to anyone about inclusiveness and in diversity, often the only thing that people think about is data, because it plays an essential role in the AI system. And it is typically through these large historical data sets that algorithms learn and predict. And so the what, how, why, and by whom, and for whom this data is collected and labeled and modeled and stored and applied has many, many consequences and implications of diversity and inclusion. Then we go to processes. In the sentence, the processes, often people talk about life cycle, but I prefer, because I come from a software engineering background, I prefer to talk about development processes, describing all the activities and tasks that are carried out. And we divided this process into three sections in our definition. One is the pre-development, that refers to that ideation area of use cases that you're trying to identify whether you want to have AI system for that. Then during development, of course, refers to partnering with stakeholders to collect data, prepare the data, and model the design and development. And finally, the post-development, that refers to the deployment of AI systems in the context of its use, further monitoring the performance, its safety, reliability, and trustworthiness while it is being used. So next slide. And a system, of course, I refer to this as system because, again, coming from a system background, software engineering background, often people talk about models or algorithms, but I think we really take a system approach in Data 61 in relation to AI. And for a given human-defined objective, you typically use these data predictions and for decision for human consumption. And there are many different techniques and methods for verifying and validating and monitoring these models and algorithms that we collectively call as systems against diversity and inclusion principles in AI. And finally, we come to governance. Governance is probably the one that has become more attractive in the last 18 months. AI governance, of course, is defined as a collection of structures, processes, and regulatory and risk management frameworks that are utilized to ensure that the development and deployment of systems are compliant, not just with law and regulations, but also conforming with standard policies and AI ethics principles. So having now discussed this, I wanted to tell you that we took these 5 pillars and we did a complete cover of both the academic literature and gray literature and white papers. And we developed a set of 46 guidelines that has been published in a book that my colleagues at Data 61 have written on responsible AI for best practices for a trustworthy AI system. And it's available in Amazon. And there is a book chapter in there that describes these guidelines. And our guidelines are now available on a web page that we are launching today formally. It has been around for a while, and some of you may have seen some parts of it, but the web page where the interactive websites for these guidelines is available is in this slide and also in the link that Beth is providing. And I'm just going to tell you a little bit about these guidelines and just quickly going through the interactive portal. So in here, you will find the definition of the diversity and inclusion the way I just covered, and then you can navigate through by these 5 pillars. So you can click on humans and you see all the guidelines that are related to humans, and the same for data, for processes, for systems, and governance. Next slide. And the next, you can actually, when you click on the guidelines, you can also see all 46 in one hit if you want, with a short description and a title for each of these guidelines. And for each of these guidelines, we have also nominated or proposed the job roles or the description, the person within the organization who should be responsible for it. So for data, you will see the list of them, and there's a description about the data pillar. And then you can go through each of these guidelines. So here is an example of a guideline that talks about improving picture-based labeling and formulating the more precise notions about user identity and qualitative data from social media resources. And you see down the bottom that it tells you who should be responsible for this particular guideline, who should be engaged with this guideline. And then you can also take each of the roles, such as AI ethicist, responsible AI lead, and then see what are the guidelines that this person should be responsible. So you can see both of these cover views of these guidelines. Okay, so next slide. And I think maybe we're finished with the interactive portal. Okay, now I want to say a few words about this idea that AI systems and diversity and inclusion should go hand in hand. And I often use the sketch from Escher, which is called Drawing Hands. And this one is an adaptation of Escher's Drawing Hands, which was from a New Yorker, in that we say that AI systems should benefit from embedding diversity and inclusion principles in their design, development, and deployment. And if you, in fact, develop an AI with these principles in mind, and you have an AI that has diversity and inclusion embedded in its development, deployment, and use, then while at the same time you can use this AI system, this should accelerate and improve our understanding and our practices of diversity and inclusion at workplace and in society. Let's face it, we are not doing a perfect job of diversity and inclusion anywhere, and therefore one would expect that if an AI is unbiased and fair, it could help us learn more how to apply these principles in our daily work and in society. And so I will tell you a little bit now about the evidence that we have been collecting, because it's very important for a researcher to check the evidence of what is already out there before you start and embark on your own journey. We did a systematic literature review of 48 very carefully screened and selected scholarly articles that shed light on these challenges and solutions for embedding diversity and inclusion in AI. This was led by my postdoc, Rifat Shams, with a collaboration with Muneera. And the study investigated two main themes. One is about diversity inclusion in the development and deployment of AI, and conversely, as I showed in the previous slide, hand in hand, how can AI be used to enhance diversity and inclusion initiatives? And so through this analysis and comprehensive look at these papers between 2017 and 2022, the review categorized and assessed various challenges and solutions that I will share with you the highlights in the next slide. The first one was about disparity in the research focus. We found that quite a lot of the information that we found in these papers were about exploring diversity inclusion within AI, not about how AI can enhance diversity and inclusion in practice. The second one was about the neglecting of diversity attributes. Gender seems to be the most commonly addressed attribute, whereas other critical factors such as ethnicity and language are frequently overlooked. And this raises a concern that we need to have more effort spent in looking at other attributes. And third one is around the sectoral bias in literature. We find that a lot of papers that we read were on health sector rather than looking at other areas such as law, finance, education, recruitment. And finally, regarding governance and geographical diversity, we find that significant lack of attention is to AI governance challenges and solutions, as well as there is limited geographical diversity, whereas most of the work is done in global north and very little, if any, on the global south. So this was the first piece of evidence that we collected. And again, this paper is available freely online if anybody is interested to look at those. The next issue that we want to look at is about how can we ensure diversity and inclusion in AI. And this is about our resources and what we have been doing. First, I will talk to you about a requirement solicitation. A lot of the research that I have done in my previous life as an academic, so as Muneera, was on requirements engineering, which is a part of software engineering when you find out what the requirements are. And so we took that background and knowledge and applied it, and I'll tell you a bit about it. That the second one was looking at all the AI incidents that are freely available online in 3 databases. And we have analyzed many of these manually to check the relevance for diversity inclusion. And finally, we have developed a specialized question bank that practitioners can use to identify whether they are considering the diversity and inclusion in their AI system development and deployment. So I will try and address each of these separately. The first one is about the user story template. And in here, we come from an agile software development background. And so we use design the special user story template by taking into account the 5 pillars of the humans and the process and the system. And we have been using this in our workshops with industry that I will explain later. The next item that I wanted to share with you is about the examples of this user story template. For example, when you want to write requirements, diversity inclusion requirements for a system that has the indigenous people as the stakeholders, the first example here, it says that I want the environmental conservation system, this is the system we are developing, to provide quantitative measure of the impact on different communities so that my community is not neglected or negatively impacted. Or the next one is about a female job seeker. The last one is about a non-binary AI user. So we use different protected attributes to write these user stories to capture the requirements, the diversity inclusion requirements for systems. Next slide. And then I just wanted to say that a while back, I wrote an article which was published on LinkedIn. That was my thoughts on learning from past mistakes. Looking at all these AI incidents that are available made me wonder that why can't we follow the same approach that people have used in navigation industry by the black box or the flight recorder approach that basically is recording all the events that takes place during a flight. And if something goes wrong, that box is being interrogated and analyzed to find the root causes of that problem in order to be able to then remedy that and fix that problem. So based on this approach, and I don't have time to go through it, we have a framework designed to look at AI incidents. We have manually analyzed a large set of recorded AI incidents from 3 online repositories to determine the relevance to D&I violation. And we've developed a decision tree from this analysis to operationalize the process of making a D&I relevance decision. And also we've developed a chatbot using GPT-4 for this process to automate this decision tree. And the final one is the question bank that I mentioned at the beginning. And I just want to give you a couple of samples of this question bank based on the 5 pillars. This is from the data pillar, the guideline 01, establishing a clear rationale for data collection. And we have composed the 5 questions here that people can look at. For example, I take the shorter one in the present. Is it important diverse data sources in ensuring equitable AI for all fully understood and considered? So you can check these questions and make sure that if you tick all of the boxes, then you're safe. If not, then you know what to do. And there's another one, next one on governance pillar, implementing inclusive tech governance practices. And there are 6 questions here in relation to how you can start thinking about how you can make inclusive practices in the governance. Next slide. I don't know how I'm doing with time. Just a little bit about our industry collaboration, and then I'll hand over to Muneera. We have tailored our diversity and inclusion in AI guidelines for specific industry sectors to provide targeted guidance. Because I have come to realize this a long time ago, and I have known AI for more than 3 decades, not just a new thing, and that's general and generic solutions don't work in AI. You have to be targeted and you have to be specific. And so this tailoring, we've come up with a tailoring mechanism for checking these guidelines for targeted audience and supporting the professionals to apply these guidelines more effectively. So I will just quickly go through some of these issues. Engaging with industry partners has been through conducting co-design workshops for this tailoring. And with the help from our design specialist colleague, Sarah Kerr, we have been running these co-design workshops and collaborating closely with partners to ensure that these guidelines not only are relevant, but also practical. And this approach has been beneficial for both parties because it's helped us to refine some of our thinking, but also it has had a hands-on approach to facilitate the integration of these principles in AI development. The first one is in D&I in AI recruitment. In recruitment, we know that the aim is to ensure the hiring processes are fair and unbiased and representative of the diverse talent pool. So in this case, we have teamed up with SEEK and successfully conducted a co-design workshop to tailor the guidelines for their specific use cases. The second case has been with media. This is also very crucial to ensure that the content that they produce is inclusive and unbiased, and again, representative of the audience. And so we have teamed up with the ABC, Australian Broadcasting Corporation, and we are tailoring the guidelines for them for their specific use cases. And the final collaboration is with the sports, because AI in sport is used to do many things. For example, optimizing performance, preventing injuries, identifying talents, engaging fans, etc., etc. But there are, of course, challenges of bias and fairness. And our team has recently contributed to the workshop for drafting a position paper by the Australian Institute of Sports for Responsible AI in Sports. And this is going to be first of its kind in the world when it is completed. And I think that maybe I'm almost done, and I'm going to hand over to Muneera to tell you the rest. Thank you.
Thank you, Didar. So carrying on with our questions around the DI and AI principles. So the next one is the when to apply the D&I principles. And here is the blueprint that for equity and inclusion in AI from the World Economic Forum. And I don't know if all of you have the big screens in front of you or not, but you can later on look it up from the link. There are 2 cycles that they have introduced. One is the builder ecosystem, one is the governance and the stakeholder ecosystem, in which both of them go side by side through all the stages of the development lifecycle, which kind of sort of you can see that is what Didar presented in the process pillar of our framework as well, that we want the D&I principles, the diversity and inclusion principles to be embedded in all stages of the processes, pre-development, during development, and post-development. And here you can see that all the considerations are being marked here. And similarly, you will find that in our guidelines, there is overlapping with some of the guidelines that are from there as well. So then who is responsible for implementing and embedding the D&I in AI principles in AI? And that concept comes from the AI governance, which will provide that, there are multi-layer approach, and there could be teams, there could be, institutional level, it could be from the government, it could be international level. So we can see that there are global AI ethics guidelines where responsibilities are defined by OECD, UNESCO's, or IEEE. And then national AI strategies, we all know about the Australia's AI ethics framework, and also from other countries as well. All the way, you can see that there are industry specific and there are regulatory policies as well. But if we want to go, into the details of who is governing, what are the stakeholders and roles. So specific roles will be context dependent within our framework. And there are other questions along with who is responsible as well. What is being governed? So whether it's about the data, whether it's about the process or the system. When is it being governed? We go back to the stages of the AI lifecycle that we previously talked about, and how is it being governed? What methodologies are being applied? So all of these questions, when we look at the governance related guidelines, the diversity inclusion principles are mentioned in many places. They talk about the fairness, they talk about the unbiased results, but it's not in a way that it would have its own place. Like, we want the diversity inclusion to have its own explicit place in all these guidelines. And this is what the advocacy for this framework that we are proposing. And diversity inclusion in the generative AI. And this has now, because for the last 1 year, we are looking at some of the work that, not empirical work, but some of the stuff that people are presenting. And I can just give an example of what an exclusion would look like in large language models training data sets. And that will give you an idea that what will happen in the generative AI when the results will come in. So let's think about the world population is approximately 8 billion, and half of the world population do not have the proper access to the internet. Hence, the technology access to any of the outputs that will be from these generative AI will also be limited. Among those who have the internet access, there is a noisy minority. We call them content creators, and a majority is the content consumers. So the representation level, you can see that there's an exclusion of the majority who are not represented in the data. Then when actual data is collected from those contents that are already there, you can see the cultural exclusion where there is more contents from the dominant global north. And then within that data, that you can see that English dominates other languages, and within that language that is already available on internet, not much of it is of the useful nature, whereas it's full of hate speech, low quality contents, misinformation, and useful noise. So on every level, you can see that where we see an exclusion. And when a generative AI trained on such data set that excludes a dominant majority of the world's cultural representation and linguistic, this impacts the output that will be created, and definitely there will be similar to the incident that we proposed before, demonstrated before. So what is at stake now is the synthetic data that is the output of these Gen AI, and they may not reflect the reality and hence the diversity that we have been talking about. So internet is becoming saturated with the AI generated contents, whether it's the words, the codes, voices, images, or the videos. And then subsequent layers of AI are going to be trained on this synthetic data, and they can perpetuate the unprecedented level of hyperfake that will blur the lines between authenticity and fabrication, and challenging our ability to discern the reality in the digital space and the practices of diversity inclusion. So, the layers of data that is generated by AI and the cycles will move on, and this will become a homogeneous data set that will only understand what the previous synthetic data would have told them, trained them about, but not representing the actual world, the actual humans for whose diverse attributes we have been advocating about. So what is not diversity and inclusion in AI? When we are not advocating to alter the truth or historical accuracy, all we're talking about is not to discriminate the underrepresented groups who are going to be impacted by a certain AI. And the recent case that we have seen where, we had very good intentions behind. If you put the diversity inclusion, you have to have a really good balance and trade-off analysis. And that's where our requirements analysis strategies come in handy, that we need to have this trade-off analysis without violating the fairness, effectiveness, and efficiency of the AI system. It should not produce the results that will generate harm in other ways. So reducing the harmful effects of what these AI systems, once the diversity inclusion principles are applied on them, this is another open research area, and that's very critical to address as well. To sum up the entire presentation, we started with the questions of why we need diversity and inclusion in AI, because it's a human rights issue to have a fair representation in a system that impacts them. What is diversity inclusion? It's the inclusion of the humans with the diverse attributes and perspectives in the data, process, system governance, and of the AI ecosystem. How to ensure the diversity inclusion? We talked about our efforts to operationalization, industry collaboration, along with the advocacy, literacy, and awareness. When to apply throughout the AI development life cycles, all the relevant stakeholders are responsible. When it cost accuracy, truth, and trust, that's not diversity inclusion principles. And we are currently facing with the next level with the Gen AI with the hyperfake and synthetic data. That's the next challenge. Here are some of the references from which I think Didar and both we were presenting some of our works. And if anyone is interested, they can either look at further or check the references here. And thank you very much. If there are any questions, comments, or suggestions, both me and Didar are happy to take.
I also just wanted to sum up by saying that we are very interested in hearing from audience and anyone who's interested in this area regarding the guidelines that we have put out there for people to use and to consider. If you feel that there is a very important one that we have missed, please do contact us. The contact details are on the website, and let us know. And we are always very happy to engage and talk and have conversations about any or all of what is in the guidelines, and also any other resources that we've provided. So just wanted to say that, yes, happy to not just take questions today and hear, but any feedback will be most welcome.
Thank you so much, Didar and Muneera. That was a fantastic overview of your content and your research. Didar, I loved the reference to the black box, actually. So often we hear about a black box being a bad thing in AI systems, but you've sort of repurposed the definition, and I thought that was a clever way of getting or making sure that we're actually learning from the mistakes, because I guess this is all happening so quickly that that's inevitable that mistakes will be made. Muneera, your slide that summarized how people being left behind, I thought was particularly effective in articulating how many people are just not being captured by the data sets that we've used in large language models. And I think that in itself is such a compelling slide in and of itself. One question that I'm going to start with, we talk a lot about the importance of diversity and inclusion in AI, and as we start to embrace and use this technology and develop our own AI ecosystem here in Australia, do you think that being good at this could actually offer us a competitive advantage, particularly internationally? Is because it's not just compliance, is it? I'd love to hear your reflections on that.
I can take the first cut. I think that this is a great advantage, because when we started this work just over a couple of years ago, as any researcher would do, we looked around, not just in Australia, but around the world, to see who else is specifically talking about diversity inclusion in AI. And as I said, there's quite a lot of work on bias, on fairness, on accountability, on transparency, and all of these ethical principles. And of course, even within the Australian AI ethics principles, if you look at it, diversity and inclusion is distributed among 2 or 3 of them. It doesn't have its own place, explicit place. And also, I find that outside of Australia, there's quite a lot of work that is going on for AI for good, under AI for good, AI for humanity also. And so there is quite a lot of really, really fantastic work that's going on around the world. But I feel that much of it is being reactive rather than proactive. Try to react to any particular AI harm or AI problems, rather than think about it proactively right from the start and building it, embedding it across the board as a cross-cutting concern in all the pillars. And so I feel that, yes, we have I would like to believe that we have an opportunity here to make a really important mark in this concept.
I love that. There's an interesting question just building on that point actually from Nick. Do you think that applying diversity and inclusion rules to generative AI in particular actually holds us back from the speed of the development of these technologies? So could we move faster if we didn't have to, worry about some of these things? So quite a provocative question.
Yeah, and I think it is a provocative question, but I would like to think I'm happy to let Muneera also have a go at this one because maybe she has other thoughts. But I'm thinking that this is really fundamental about building anything. If you want to build a bridge and you don't think about its safety, you can build it much quicker and let it break down and kill people, and then you suddenly realize, oh yeah, I should have fixed it from the beginning. So AI safety is very, very important right now. And we know that in Australia, we are focusing on AI safety quite a lot. And I believe that not paying attention to diversity and inclusion is guaranteed to make your AI unsafe. So, I mean, you want to do things fast and break it, as they say. Okay, go ahead and break it, but you have to fix it at some point eventually.
Yes. So I would just add one point to Didar's answer about the trade-off analysis that I was talking about. When with efficiency, effectiveness, accuracy of the system, there are other attributes. We have to do a trade-off analysis. That was the part of our operationalization when we were looking from requirements engineering perspective, that which of the diversity inclusion, when you have to embed them actually, and you are analyzing what are the features of the system. So how are they going to impact the efficiency of the system? So you have to come up at some, I would say, compromise somewhere that where at least the system is doing, if it's a safety critical system, it has to generate a response within certain, a fraction of a second. You cannot delay the process. So what's the cost of putting these extra layers? So this trade-off analysis has to be done at the requirements analysis stage of when you are embedding the D&I principles. And then there is at the same time, you have to do the risk assessment. Okay, if I am prioritizing the efficiency or the time response or the effectiveness, and I do not put any layer to delay of D&I to delay, what is the risk of what's going to happen? What if it's going to cause any harm? So all this analysis has to go before you're actually implementing the system with these principles. So it's contextual. It differs from system to system, what level of harms could be anticipated.
No, I think that's absolutely important. Nick has apologized and says he's sorry to ask, but he always asks provocative questions. But that's what we like. This is interactive.
We need to hear this. I think that's really important. No need to apologize.
Thank you for joining, Nick. We have a question here from Sean, who so he's a product manager and really likes the idea of using the user story template to provoke questions of design for users with diverse attributes. And it's a very practical, easy tool to kind of lift and use. But how do you mitigate for the unvalidated assumptions that might be made by people participating in that process who they themselves perhaps can't, they're not embodying those people with those attributes themselves? So how do you plan for that? It's a tricky one.
Very, very, very good question. So what we have actually done a bit of testing and analysis with using large language models by giving them the prompt to act as one of those roles. So we have given a persona of a person we think, you assume that you have these kind of diverse attributes or these kind of protected attributes. And here is the system that is under development. What would be your concern? Can you, put yourself in the shoe of that person and tell us your concern? And so we've received some really good results. I'm not saying that it is 100% because nothing with large language models is 100%. And we are sort of still in the evolution phase of large language models, but you can actually use, we use GPT-4 with these personas. And maybe Muneera can want to say a few words, because she was the one who was doing the test and playing around with this. And I think that way you can at least make sure that the kind of concerns that you receive are related to this person's protected attributes. So, for example, if you have disability, you can say that, okay, with this system, this is my problem. And so you can take those on board when you are writing the requirements for the system.
So assuming the roles that, you are not familiar with, I think if you can find a person, that's better, but then this chat, the GPT-4 persona generation can complement the process. But all the stuff that I talked about, the synthetic data, that you have to then eventually make sure that the output is also compliant to the principles as well. So it's not just the human generated views and aspects. It's also, if you are using an AI to complement for the missing perspective, it has to go through the same checks of the compliance to make sure that AI is not just making things up as well.
And they talk about that human in the loop process to obviously always keep oversight of that. Question here from Salem: is it possible to train AI models with synthetic data that is continually updated so that reflections and changes and perhaps a broader subset of data can be captured, so that we're actually taking greater consideration into account of diversity and inclusion characteristics?
I think it's just a changing. It depends what you mean continually updated. Who is going to do that update? Humans or the AI itself? If human is in the loop and feedback is being received from a human, then you may have a little bit more confidence that yes, maybe some of these are being captured. But I think you have to have a very systematic approach. It is not going to happen on an ad hoc basis. Even if you are going to do these continual updates, you have to have a systematic approach to it. And you have to develop methodologies and mechanisms by which you then make sure that you have ticked the boxes for the representation within the population that this AI is for. And so, I mean, maybe you can, but I'm just saying that it has to be done very systematically. It can't be ad hoc, and it can't be done by AI. It has to be human in the loop.
There is a question here which I really want to highlight, perhaps more for the National AI Centre, but I think I'd love your thoughts on this as well, Didar and Muneera. We certainly acknowledge and understand the impact of AI on small and medium-sized businesses in Australia. Now, of course, you're being encouraged and supported to consider how you might adopt AI, but as this person has said, many of these organizations don't have data strategies. You're just starting to look at the business case and look at how you can get value from these tools. Of course, you're time poor, you're struggling to find resources, funding. It's just another thing. So the National AI Centre is really looking to focus on what we can do to help small and medium-sized businesses really understand and adopt AI. But from your perspective, Didar, Muneera, what kinds of advice would you give to a small and medium-sized business owner or somebody who's perhaps not an AI specialist? How would they begin to think about this in the context of using AI tools in their workplace?
I think you're talking about two different things. So using AI or developing
AI. Yeah, that's right. So I think probably using in this context,
In terms of using AI, I think we need to establish some baseline knowledge. And I go back to my research background in the requirements field, because we always used to get this exact same comment from small to medium enterprises regarding that I don't have enough time to elicit the requirements, capture them, and write them down before I start building my system. And so I just want to quickly develop something and deliver it and worry about the requirements after. And so within that framework, I developed together with a colleague of mine, a professor from US, an approach that we called it just enough, enough. And that just enough was basically defining what is the baseline, the minimum that I need to do to at least go through the gate of saying that, okay, I am reasonably safe as far as D&I are concerned, or as far as any of the ethics principles are concerned. So we need to work for SMEs and with SMEs to define that just enough and the baseline requirements for diversity, inclusion, or from transparency, for accountability, all of this. And once you have established that, then you can try to provide some automation, provide some kind of, can I say, help tools, frameworks that they can use to quickly do something. It's not as if that it has to take a lot of time, especially if you can bring some automation into it. But I'm thinking about, you need the baseline. You cannot just do nothing. Yes. You have to have the baseline.
And we're hearing a lot about fit for purpose AI strategies and development as well. So I think that's going to come into it. I think we've probably run out of time for many more questions. I do want to acknowledge and thank you so much for making a contribution in terms of submitting questions. We'll try and come back to you on our LinkedIn page and make sure that we're addressing some of those questions. I just want to share a couple more webinars that are coming up so that, that you're across the extra activities and events. First of all, of course, thank you, a huge thank you to Didar and Muneera for their fantastic presentation today. We will share that URL as part of the webinar conversation. You will find a lot of resources and material there that you can look up, and Muneera will figure out a way to get those references to people as well so that people can continue their reading. In terms of next webinars for the Responsible AI Network, we have an event coming up in a couple of weeks to look at the EU AI Act and what that might mean in Australia and for Australian businesses. So that's coming up on the 9th of April with the invitations going out to that very soon. The AI standards overview, we have a local representative from the IEEE talking about AI standards, and that information and invitation will be going out soon as well. And then we are very pleased to be hosting Australia's Productivity Commissioner, who will be talking about the impact of AI on Australia's productivity, which will be a fantastic discussion. So that's happening on the 21st of May. We actually have a whole pile of events coming up, and we would recommend to all of you to make sure that you're subscribed to our mailing list. That is where we send out all of the invitations to our free webinars. On the LinkedIn page, you will find a heap more information. We'll publish all of the resources and links to today's conversation and to future events. We would love to have you part of our conversation, so you can join on the social media using the hashtag AI Australia, and that helps to validate and surface some of the material that you have. We'd also very warmly invite you to include your organisation on our AI discoverability portal. So that's another way to promote your AI solution if you're developing AI. And also, if you're looking for further information about artificial intelligence, perhaps you're just at the start of your journey, we have a whole pile of free learning resources made available through the Institute for Applied Technology. We've announced 1 million scholarships available for people interested to learn more. So there's a heap happening at the National AI Centre. We would love for you to be part of our community. Thank you for joining today, and we look forward to welcoming you at an event again soon. Thank you.